The story starts with David Gamble proposing to his girlfriend Jenna, and she accepts. Months go by, and they become a happily married couple. On his birthday, Jenna cooks for him. Oh, this couple fine. She surprises him with a wristwatch because he's always on CP time. She hurriedly dresses up for work so she doesn't miss an important meeting. While changing, her phone rings consistently and David goes to answer it for her. But he sees that it's Greg, his best friend, and wonders why he is calling his wife. Greg greets him with a happy birthday, and David jokingly says, Greg must be having an affair with his wife. Boy, you just put that into Tubi existence. Greg says he's been trying to reach him. Then he reminds David of a business deal they have to seal. When Jenna comes back, David tells her that Greg called, and the situation gets a bit awkward, but she smiles through it and takes her phone to work. Getting back to his meal, David wonders what's going on between Greg and Jenna, but brushes it aside. He goes to work and meets Greg speaking with Alan, their fellow client, whom they've been trying to land before the Trump tariffs kick in. David continues from there and finalizes the deal. Then he joins Greg to arrange a lunch meeting with their mates, and the men rejoice after successfully closing the deal, since the profits alone are a game changer. Still in high spirits, David sees Jenna and Lisa, who is his secretary and also Jenna's bestie. They come into the office, so he briefs them about their success. He then invites Jenna to join him for lunch, but she turns down his offer, saying she'll be extremely busy with work. He brings up a dinner outing, but she still turns him down, saying she came to inform him of how busy she'll be. Girl, you better have a surprise birthday party planned. Even though she promises to make it up to him, David feels sad since she's been turning down their dates recently. He even asks her for her work schedule, but she gets defensive and doesn't give it to him. But after she leaves, David sees her hugging Greg on her way out and assumes that something might be going on between them. A while later, David meets Greg, and the first thing he asks about is the thing with his wife earlier. Greg scoffs and says that Jenna was just talking about his birthday gift, so David backs down and opens up to him about his quality time issues with Jenna. However, Greg just tells him to chill out, insisting that Jenna works late. But deep down, David wonders how Greg knows about her work schedule, thinking if Jenna has extracurricular activities after her 9 to 5. When they get to the bar to celebrate their success, Jenna calls him and apologizes, promising to make it up to him during the coming weeks. She suddenly receives another call, and their conversation ends. Still down in the dumps, David sees Greg leaving the bar, claiming to be going on a date. Later that night, Jenna returns home and is shocked to see David still awake and waiting for her. He angrily asks her where she's been and why she didn't answer his calls, but she blames it on work and gets mad at him for not trusting her. She then reminds him of times when he was in her shoes and how she took his word for it. Upon realizing his mistake, he apologizes to her and tries to get all nice and touchy, but her kitty ain't in the mood. Girl, I would have folded for that man. Have him fold me in all kinds of ways. Then she showers. After she leaves, he finds a napkin in her coat that says Lucky's, and he gets suspicious. The next day at work, Lisa hands him some documents and asks about how his birthday went. Once she realizes that it didn't go well, she apologizes. Since Lisa and Jenna are best friends, David asks her if she's noticed anything weird about Jenna, but Lisa denies it. He then checks Jenna's emails and finds that she's been exchanging some friendly emails with Greg, but nothing damning to solidify his suspicions. She even has some flights planned coming up. Unable to control his unease, David phones Terry to get a private investigator to look into Jenna. When David finally meets the private investigator, James Finley, he asks David what he plans to do next if he finds out Jenna is truly getting railed, but David simply tells him he's dying of curiosity. He hands the investigator some documents and money, and James tells him he'll be in touch. Days pass, and David quietly waits for James's findings. Meanwhile, his balls get bluer. One time, Jenna swings by his office and says she has a break. David tries giving her the cold shoulder, but when she says they can have lunch and she can eat his cake at home, his perineum pulsates, so he follows her. After getting ate, David works happily in his office, but then Greg comes along and tries narrating his recent sexcapade to him. David cuts him off, claiming to be busy. Greg notices his uptight attitude and tries to talk to him about it, but a call from the detective interrupts their conversation, and David schedules a meeting with him after work. He bluntly tells Greg to excuse him, and Greg leaves the office bewildered. After work, David meets with James at a parking lot and learns that Jenna has been secretly hanging out with Greg, and they even have a planned flight to Hawaii next Friday. David says this is enough evidence and tells James he can end the investigation. David leaves moodily and goes to a bar, imagining Greg dickmatizing his wife. He nearly breaks into a fit and starts sobbing as soon as he gets home. He hears Jenna return from work and quickly hides the photos under the couch. When she gets inside, she notices he acting different and asks what's wrong with him, but he gets mad at her and reminds her that she's the one who's been acting weird with all her late work excuses. She tells him she heard from Greg and Lisa that he hasn't been himself lately. David immediately loses it and questions her for monitoring his life while she gets to do as she pleases. Jenna quietly calms him down and gets some water for him, but he hears her speaking to someone on the phone about how he knows something is going on, and they have to find a way to tell him the truth. When Jenna returns with the glass of water, David rejects it and coldly walks away. During a meeting at work, David storms out and phones James to set up another meeting. They have a discussion and David demands a hitman. Before granting his request, James warns David it could get messy. David confirms he wants a hitman, and James gives him a contact, but before leaving, he threatens David not to ever contact him again. David sends a voicemail to the hitman and follows James's procedures. When he gets back to the office, Greg asks him to run a draft they can print out, but David gives him a bad attitude. Greg then asks what's wrong, but David doesn't open up. Greg is sick of being disrespected. Then David receives a call from the hitman, who asks for a meeting later that night. He meets with the hitman in a parking lot, and the man tells him to pay $20,000 and give him a photo of the target. He tells David not to contact him after the job is done, and if David has a change of heart, then that'll be their final meeting. He warns David not to tell anyone about him, and David agrees to treat this like a DL grinder meeting. Later, David shows up at Jenna's workplace with flowers and apologizes for how the previous night went. She happily welcomes him and informs him that she'll be done with her busy schedule next week, promising that things will get back to normal. David then asks her to go on a getaway trip with him on the Friday she completes her project, but Jenna turns him down, saying she's already made plans with her friends to celebrate. "You in danger, girl," David reminds her that he's doing it for their marriage, so Jenna reconsiders and says she'll discuss it with her friends. He leaves her, and she thanks him for the flowers. After he walks away, she calls Greg and tells him what David had planned for her. Little does she know, David is outside her door, eavesdropping. He quickly leaves her office and meets with the hitman later, handing him the money, photos of Greg, and his address. Before leaving, the hitman confirms that David is sure of his decision, then promises to contact him in the next 48 hours. The next day, David wakes up and sees a note Jenna left on the bed. He reads it and sees that she promises to explain everything to him later that night. Before everything is revealed, let us know in the comments how you think this will end. At David's workplace, Greg talks about a flight attendant he's been dating who could be wifey material. Then David tells Greg that he hasn't been comfortable with the way he's been around his wife. Shocked, Greg tells him he would never do anything to hurt him and that everything will make sense soon. David scoffs and says, eventually it won't matter, and then gets ready for the date he has with Jenna. When David meets up with Jenna, it looks like her melon's about to bust out of her dress. She takes him to a bar. She covers his eyes and leads him into a room filled with his friends and colleagues. As soon as he opens his eyes, they all surprise him for his birthday. Jenna reveals that she and Greg have been planning it for weeks, and the reason they waited until after his birthday to celebrate was so he wouldn't suspect a thing. Surprised, he confesses that he thought she and Greg were breaking each other's backs. She feels a little insulted. She then shows him another gift, 2 tickets to Hawaii. She got them at a discount thanks to Greg sleeping with a flight attendant. Can we just talk about how terrible James is as a private investigator? That man did not investigate. Jenna finds it odd that Greg didn't show up to the surprise party. David starts to get nervous, so he calls Greg, but it goes to voicemail. Lisa shows up and emphasizes how good of a friend Greg is for making the party happen. David then excuses himself to call again. He tries Greg's phone multiple times, but the calls don't go through. When the call finally connects, David thanks him for setting up the party, and Greg says he'll be there in the next 30 minutes. Do you know you got 30 minutes? After hanging up, David starts sobbing, knowing full well that Greg won't be able to make it to the event. Later, Jenna calls everyone's attention and tells them how things had been rough between her and David while they prepared for the party. She tells them he suspected her of having an affair with Greg. Greg isn't around, no surprise, since he's usually on CP time, so they kickstart the celebration without him. Jenna kisses David and he steps away to check his phone. He starts groaning when he sees a message from the hitman informing him that the job has been done. David immediately recalls the warnings James and the hitman gave him before he confirmed the operation. He starts panicking, then passes out, scaring Jenna and the guests. That's the end of the movie. Apparently, Tubi wanted to stretch out the plot into 3 whole movies when we know damn well that Greg can't be dead. I just know that white hitman mistook another black man as Greg and killed a random black man. What did y'all think of this one? And should we cover the other 2 movies?
Hey, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe now and turn on the notification because YouTube isn't recommending my videos. And if you like to watch more foolishness, click here or here.